Friends, day 29, 75 refined, and today we find our quote to be from Unknown. You don't have to be extreme, just consistent. Um, because it's an unknown quote, let's say I said it. That's right, I said it. No, but anyways, that's a good quote. Just be consistent. You don't have to be extreme, and that's for me. I'm like one of those they call like an all or nothing type of a person, which can be really really bad. You want to go all in, or I'm not going to go in at all. Sometimes you just need to just be consistent. You don't need to go balls to the wall. But all right, let's get into our reading today. So we're First Chronicles 10:26, and you start to see some repeating stories here, going back to the books of First, Second Samuel into First Chronicles. Once again, Chronicles is this was written after the exile, which we saw at the end of Second Kings, that they went into exile into Babylon. So Chronicles was written after the exile, most likely, and you're not going to see as many, let's say, David's sins, for example. It's going to gloss over David's sins because it wants to give you a highlight reel of the Davidic line, because it's trying to, for lack of a better term, hype up the children of Israel, or Judah in this case, for the coming king and for the Messiah to come, and which will be coming from the line of David. So let's get in, and then I'll try to highlight some key differences, and sometimes you might even notice, if you pick up on them, some things like, wait, that sounds like a contradiction or something. I'll kind of walk us through some of those as well. So starts out with the death of Saul in chapter 10. This event obviously already appeared in 1 Samuel 31, but Chronicles adds an important explanation, because it says Saul died for his unfaithfulness to the Lord and because he consulted a medium. So Chronicles often does this. So Samuel tells a story. Chronicles likes to explain the spiritual reason behind it. Very important. Because Saul rejected God, the kingdom was given to David. It's not that Saul was a bad king. It's because he rejected God. And then in chapter 11, David becomes king. All right, all of Israel gathers around to crown David. They say, "We are your own flesh and blood." David captures Jerusalem, and then he makes it the capital. Jerusalem becomes the political and spiritual center of Israel. Then we go through David's elite warriors, the mighty men, chapters 11 and 12. These were the men who supported David long before he became the king. So these were his ride or die kind of guys. And then God raised up a community around him, the king that was appointed. Let's see here. So then we bring the ark to Jerusalem. One of David's first priorities was bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, because the Ark represents God's presence among the people. And he basically said that because Saul didn't listen to God, I'm going to listen to God, so I need the Ark in the capital. The first attempt goes wrong. Okay, so why was Uzziah, however you pronounce it, why was Uzziah struck down? So the Ark is transported, the oxen stumbles, Uzziah reaches out to steady the Ark, right? And then because he touched it, God strikes him dead. Well, that's kind of a wild thing, right? So at first it seems kind of harsh, but here's the deeper issue. And it becomes clear later in the same reading. But it says in Numbers 7:9, it says they are to carry it on their shoulders. So the first thing was that they were using poles, not a cart. This was how the Philistines transported the ark. This is not how God intended the ark to be carried. And the problem was not simply Uzziah touching the ark, the entire situation, because God's instructions were ignored. He is serious about his instructions. And like I said, David later acknowledged this in 15:13 of First Chronicles. Because we did not seek him according to the rule, the Lord our God broke out against us. So David gets it, and everybody just needed to go along with that, because what is the common theme that we saw with all of the ungodly kings, the evil kings? They did what was evil in the Lord's sight. All right, but if they followed God, things seemed to go pretty well. We could learn a thing or two from this lesson. when we follow God, things just seem to go better. That doesn't mean you're not going to face struggles in your life, but follow the Lord. I know that when I was running from God, things were seemingly going very, very well until they weren't. So worship returns to the center. Eventually, when the ark does arrive, David leads the nation into worship. This is after he was like, okay, we're not going to transport this right now. We're going to bring it over here for a little bit. And then it stayed there for, I think it said 3 months. Then eventually it does make its way into Jerusalem. Give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, 1 Chronicles 16:8. So Chronicles places a lot more emphasis on worship, the Levites, musicians, and temple structure than even Samuel does. And this is because Chronicles was written, like I said, after the exile, when the rebuilding the temple life was central to Israel's identity. So they really wanted to get a hold of this covenant promise. 1 Chronicles 17, this was David wants to build the temple, but God tells David, no, your son, Solomon, is going to be the one to build it, and I will establish his throne forever. This because this is one of the clearest messianic prophecies, because your son, now he's talking metaphorically, Solomon will build the temple, but it says, I will establish his throne forever. Your son. Who is his son? Jesus is often referred to as the son of David because he comes from that Davidic line. That's the throne that's being established forever. The book of Chronicles likes to record David's victories over the surrounding nations, but the emphasis is not military glory. The emphasis is preparing the nation for worship because of the future temple. So preparing the temple. David begins organizing the entire worship structure of Israel. Chapters 22 through 26, he appoints Levites, priests, musicians, gatekeepers, temple treasurers, worship in Israel. It's not random, right? It's structured around God's presence because the Ark of the Covenant is the presence of God in their midst. So here are some of the differences. I wanted to kind of go through some of these that you see in Chronicles and Samuel. And as I go through the remainder of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, I'll kind of try to highlight some of the differences that you might see. And sometimes there are seeming contradictions, and I want to kind of highlight those as well, because a lot of skeptics will be like, oh, look, see, it says something totally different. Most of the time, there is a reason behind it, and we'll even get through that when we get through the Gospels. We'll talk about those, what we call seeming contradictions. So there's some things that look different. So Samuel gives raw political history. But like I said before, Chronicles is more theological history, focusing on the covenant, the temple, Israel's identity. So because of that, it leaves out a lot of the failures in David's life. David and Bathsheba, the murder of Uriah, Absalom's rebellion. These things are just left out. It emphasizes as David as the king who prepares the temple and establishes worship. That's the focus here. So here's some of the differences. You'll notice some of these contradictions. When you consider the context, most of them are resolved. Who incited David to the census? This is a big one. A lot of people like to point this out because in 2 Samuel 24, it says that God allowed it, but then in 1 Chronicles, it says Satan incited David. Both can be true. Now, we know that God is sovereign, and when we go to read the book of Job, we'll see this conversation and with the heavenly hosts and Satan saying, oh, look over here, what's going on? And God's like, well, consider my servant Job. And Satan's like, oh, that's just because he has all this good stuff. Let me take care of him, see if he still worships you. Again, we'll get into that as we read the book of Job. But we do see that Satan was the one who actually does it, but God allowed it. Now, there's some hard theological questions and wrestling that we have to do with that, of what God allows and what he doesn't allow, and in what we call the problem of evil and suffering. And it's one of the biggest arguments that atheists have against any type of God, let alone the Judeo-Christian God. However, we also have the best argument for that, which is about sin and sin nature, sin coming into the world, and us trying to be reconciled back to God because of sin. That's something that we'll get into once we're outside of 75 Refined. I do want to get into that though, so that is something that I will make a separate video on once this wraps up. I know I talked about some other topics, baptism, the Trinity, again, talk about Contradictions, I'll talk about more of the contradictions, seeming contradictions, work through some of those. Biblical apologetics, arguments for the existence of God, how can I trust the Bible? All of these different things we'll go through. But that being said, so it says that Satan incited David, but God allowed it to happen. Both can be true. And another example are the numbers in the census. They both give, Samuel and Chronicles give different total numbers for the soldiers. Ancient military records often included different categories of troops, such as standing army versus army reserves. This may be reflected in one of those things. There could also be rounding that's done, because we know that in the ancient Near East there was a lot of, we call it hyperbole, where sometimes they'll say, oh, there was hundreds of thousands, and it was like maybe it was 1,000, right? And it's not that it's lying. It's just the same as we would say, oh, the Bears slaughtered the Packers in this game. It's like, well, they beat them in a football game. So there is a bit of hyperbole sometimes that is used, and it would be understood in the cultural context. So the number is reflecting different counting methods. There's also a difference in the amount that David paid for the threshing floor. Now, it may be different that when David paid for the certain plot and just the ox and at that time, but then later came back for the whole field, that's where there may be some differences in the prices as well that we see recorded. One may be a temporary, and then the other number was the later full price. Again, those are some of the things that we're looking at total context, because what he bought was eventually the temple mount. So that's during the sacrifice. Let's go through some what we would call the Christ thread, because that's always what we're looking for when we're doing these readings through the scripture. Here is where's Christ in the Old Testament. One thread that keeps running throughout these chapters is the line of David. You hear me say that, the Davidic line. Jesus, son of David, his line is through David. God promises that David's throne will last forever. Centuries later, the angel tells Mary, says this in Luke 1:32, the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. David prepared the kingdom, Solomon builds the temple, but Jesus will become the true and eternal king, and now is the true eternal king. And so that's where we are going to wrap it up today. Let me actually take a quick preview to see where we're going to be at tomorrow. Day 30. We're going to wrap up First Chronicles, and we're going to go into Second Chronicles. So we are flying through, what is that, the 13th book? And then we're going to go into the 14th book. So again, we're just zipping, flying right through all of these books. I love you, friends. Praying for you. I'm so thankful for you. Please do me a favor. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Throw a comment in there. What are you getting out of these? Once again, are you finding something that like, wow, I didn't catch that, or this seems to be a contradictory statement, or how do you reconcile that? So as you find them, throw them in the comments. I'm happy to address them either in the comments or in the following follow-up video. That's all I have. Thank you, and we will talk to you tomorrow.